In this video, I'll be showing you how I made this 3D nightlight with my head 3D printed with translucent filament sitting on top of a CNC machined Fleur made out of Purple Heart. And the whole thing is controlled in this black container with a motion sensor and an ESP32 controller. And I will go through the entire process of how I put it together and built it. And I hope you enjoy my beautiful 3D printed head that shines in the dark. So here is the finished nightlight. And I'll kick on the light here. Let's see. So I'll take you through the whole build process and stick around to the end, and I'll give you my ideas on what I would change. I'll be the first to admit it's a little silly, my head on the top of a Fleur de lis, the Rob de lis we'll call it. But I really wanted to proof of concept and figure out how to build something like this. So in that regards, it was a success. So let's go through the process of how I built it. Got some new toys to play with. I want to make a nightlight that plugs into a wall outlet like your typical bathroom little nightlight things. So incorporating the CNC machining, the 3D printing, the LED lights, the woodworking, all of that stuff, but in a much smaller format than I have been working with. So I bought, first thing is for power, to convert your AC power down to, from 120 AC down to DC, which the LEDs use. So this is a HiLink PM01 power source, converts AC to DC, 3 watts at 5 volts. And this goes in this PCB control board. Wires in there, you've got your standard blade plugs that solder into there. Then I've got a ESP32 controller, which is similar to if you're familiar with the Arduino platforms. This allows me to load it with a LED control program that will control the LEDs. So that gets wired into there. And this whole mechanism then fits inside of this 3D printed box. So that's the size of just the power supply, and then the LED thing would be, whatever I build in terms of wood would be on top. So it's larger than I would like, but it is, the smallest I could find. And the other component is this motion sensor that can also be triggered by this ESP32 to turn on and off power. And it's a little larger than what I anticipated, but we'll see. So that's the idea, and we'll see if I can make it work. And bought a few of these in case I fry some in the process, but it should be fun to work with. So we have our prototype done for the most part. We have our motion sensor that's controlling the LED lights, and we're just on a breadboard right now just to prove things out. The other thing I'm thinking of putting on here is I'm going to get a smaller motion sensor. They make them with a smaller physical footprint. And I'm going to also get a light sensor to where I can put a light sensor that the light sensor and the motion sensor will have to be both triggered in order for the LEDs to come on. That way, if it's light in the room that you're putting it in, it won't trigger the light to come on. I have my permanent board. So it's a printed circuit board that is meant to plug into a wall. So this is basically what you would find in the internals of one of these wall warts. So it's got an AC to DC converter from 120 volts AC to 5 volts DC. And all these other components that we put on here are simply for safety and dealing with power surges. There's a 500 milliamp fuse and just an LED light for power, a couple capacitors, but safety capacitor, common mode choke. That again, it all smooths out your voltages, amperages, and prevents overcurrents, etc., shorts, things like that. So then the ESP board will be soldered onto here, and all the components soldered on. The one thing I ordered some smaller ESP32 boards, because this one, although it does fit, it doesn't fit in the enclosure. And I don't want to redo the enclosure, so they sell smaller boards that do just the same thing, that you can program them just the same as you would these larger boards. So I've got that on order, and I'll probably wind up with having a 3-pin female socket on the outside of this that you can plug in whatever LED thing I come up with. Because in the end, the LED is just power, ground, and the data line. So if maybe I want to swap them out with different lighted things, that'll allow me to do that. And we'll go from there. So we have all of our most of our components installed on our PCB. And I've got a light sensor that's on one of the I/O pins on the ESP32. I've got 5 volt power here that will power the LEDs and the motion sensor. And I made a modification in the enclosure. One, I put a translucent little window that lines up with the light sensor. So that will allow that to trigger. And then I have this enclosure for the motion sensor. I will tack that in there. And that attaches, let's see if it's this way. That will attach here. And then I'm printing another one of these that has a port in the top. I bought these magnetic connectors. So you can connect 3-prong for the LED lights. There'll be power, ground, and data. And I'll have one of these on the outside of here so that I can swap out LED fixtures. I don't know how these are supposed to be wired. These pins don't fit the standard, your standard, whatever these connectors are called. So I think I'm gonna have to hardwire soldered wires onto these. I'm not sure what you're supposed to use. And then the last step, I'm going to do something like this where I'll have a wooden background with maybe some inlay of some sort. And then the head will go attached there. And you'll have LED lights behind it. Working on the final wiring up of this power supply / ESP / Nightlight / doohickey that I'm building. We have AC to DC converter, safety, EMF or EMI, whatever, magnetic field reduction stuff, a light sensor, a motion sensor. These are magnetic connections, so I've got the LEDs with magnetic connections. So this is the LED. It's a little circle with 7 LEDs on there. And I've got it wired to this other magnetic 3-prong doohickey, let's call it. Couldn't find anything on how you're supposed to wire this up. They're just these 3 little brass pins. And I'm like, there should be some kind of a connector, like one of these, your standard header, but they don't fit in the standard headers. And I don't know how you're supposed to do it. So I just soldered it because that's, that works. So the idea is you've got this LED is going to go behind this head and light it up. And then behind there, this is going to mount to, I'm making a 3D Fleur de lis that the head is going to sit inside of. So I'll do another video on that, designing it in Fusion right now. That's the idea. So that, and I made these, I thought, going with this magnetic connector, I would be able to just, pop this, my crazy head, pop that off, and then, make a Christmas one, right? And then be able to pop that on, and, it would either connect, make some kind of an attachment on this case where it snaps in, or magnets, something like that. But I just want to get the internals figured out. So again, that's my PCB board with the ESP32, a light sensor. That's just a AC to DC converter. Like a fuse, safety capacitor, other things for magnetic interference, etc. And then I've got the light sensors hardwired into one of these headers, and then it just plugs in there. The LEDs I've got wired, the LEDs are, which ones are the LEDs? Oh, the LEDs are wired into this 3-prong magnetic connector, and they're hardwired on the other side. And then the motion sensor are these power and ground here, and then a data pin in GPIO4. It is using just these standard, the crimp connector, the connections that you crimp on. Anyway, not important. This whole thing has got to jam into here, and I think that maybe these are still too high. I may need to increase the height of this top piece a little bit. But until then, we're going to jam everything in there and hope that we don't smash any wires in the process. one of the things about this magnetic connector is I've got a hole cut out in the top here that's supposed to snap into. I think the problem is going to be that in order to have the hole small enough for the wires to snap into, the other side is not just going to magnetically snap into place like it's supposed to. But we'll see once if I can get this positioned. And I didn't want to have, a bunch of extra wire. So I made it just enough to where I can get that centered in there. So I've got that pressed in place. Now we got to get the rest of this. Here we go. And like I can tell there's some resistance, so I'm thinking the wires are hitting up against this. Yeah, I can see them there. They're hitting up against the top here. So I'm going to have to make some modifications to this case to make it a little bit deeper. And I know I'll probably have to wind up making some other modifications. But I want to just get everything in the case to see if the light sensor works and the program of the ESP32. So I programmed it to basically say, if the room is dark and there's motion, turn on the lights. If it is bright enough, if the lights are on, don't turn it on and don't look for motion. So this is kind of the, I wanted to have one thing that you just plug into the wall and, like those little cheap night lights that you buy. So now my guess is this is not, well, it did kind of go right in there. So, but it looks like it's not totally connected. So let me push it a little bit more. Like I say, I don't want to push the other one through the other side. But I'm going to have to look up some more information about these, because it's really cool that you just magnetically connect it. I guess I could always glue the other side, make the hole a little bit bigger, glue the other side to where that can't move, and then this would just come on and off very easily. Anyway, so we've got it all fit together. Now we'll plug it in. And the way I've got it programmed is when you plug it in, this is going to flash red. It should flash red 3 times, which just tells me that the ESP32 has booted and it's now starting the program. Then it's going to light each of these LEDs with a blue light. It takes 60 seconds for the motion sensor to warm up. So I just have it, kind of lighting the LEDs blue as the motion sensor is warming up. And then when they're all lit blue, that means that this has completed its warm-up sequence, and then it's going to start looking for motion, light, etc. Take this off of my head. So that's what should happen. And where's my plug? So let me hold this like this, see what's going on. So I'm plugging it in. There's your flashes for the boot started. Now there's your first blue light saying that now the motion sensor is warming up. And when all 7 are lit up blue, that means that the motion sensor is now active. I can't hold this thing properly. So now the motion sensor is active, and as I suspected, so the the light sensor is behind this little window, and because it's not facing the light, it thinks it's dark. So dark and motion means it turns on. And right now I just have it set to turn on for like 10 seconds so that I can test it. So it's going to go off here pretty quickly. And then when it senses motion, it's going to turn on again. So now if I turn it this way, is it going to turn off? Yeah. Well, so that's my light sensor, and I'm facing it into the light now. Yeah, so now it knows that it's light, and it's not going to trigger when there's motion. All right. But when I turn it back this way, it's now dark enough to where it's going to turn back on. So the first problem is that this window and the fact that it's facing, it needs direct light, or I might be able to adjust the sensitivity, because this light sensor has values from like 0 to, I don't know, 1600 or something like that. So if I tell it dark is, I'll increase the threshold of what it considers, quote, dark, and that might work. Otherwise, I'm going to have to relocate this sensor to the top of the device, because light's going to be coming from the top. So that would, I would rather not do that, because it involves more soldering. I'm going to play around with the threshold for what it considers dark and see if that fixes it. So it's sort of working as designed, though, like I say, the light sensor needs to be repositioned. But the motion seems to be picking up motion. And like I say, I have it set to turn off after like 10 seconds, where in the final version, I'll say, when there's motion, turn it on and leave it on for like 5 minutes. And there might be a setting where you say, look for continuous motion. What I don't want is if you're in there and you're relying on this light and it's dark and you happen to not move enough that it shuts the light off and you have to wave to get it to come back on. That is the state currently. And I will go and make some design changes to the box and play around with the threshold of the light sensor and see if I can get that to work without having to reposition it. Quick run through of the Fusion 360 files and objects. So this is the top of the enclosure for the power supply, ESP32, etc. And excuse me, I'm clicking in the wrong window. So there are 4 holes for the box for the motion sensor. And the motion sensor sits in there. There's 2 holes for the sensitivity settings, and then just a little channel for the wires to go through. This is that little clear window for the light sensor. Then you have, this is the Fleur that I basically took the 3D model of my head and I just used it to cut out a section of that top part so that it'll sit flush, somewhat flush. It still sticks out a bit. And then a cavity for the LED lights, and then a second smaller cavity for where the wires come through so that it'll sit flush. And then this whole thing will sit on top of this mount. And I did the same thing. I used the Fleur de lis and I did a combine of the bodies with a cut to cut out the actual, the exact profile of the Fleur de lis. And then I wound up having to cut out some sections because the CNC machine can't get into those into these small areas like in this, the bits aren't that small, so this is not quite a sharp point like that. So I just cut out some sections so that it sits flush. And then there's a hole that goes all the way through for your wires. And then they'll come out here and the magnetic connector goes there. And then there's 4 feet. These 4 feet fit into those 4 holes. And so all of this will be, these are all be 3D printed. Oh, excuse me. These will all be 3D printed, and then this Fleur de lis will be machined. And I think I'm going to use Purple Heart and machine that out of Purple Heart and then attach to the mount here. So that's the fusion part of things. We are just about done with this project. So this is our power supply with the ESP32 and the motion sensor. For now, I've turned off the light sensor just to make it a little less complicated. And I've got in software I can turn on whether it's going to use the light sensor or not. Right now I just have the LEDs hardwired to this magnetic connection just to test it out. And I created this Fleur de lis on the CNC machine where my head is going to fit there. And the LEDs will, the LEDs will go in this pocket. The wires, I need to drill a hole here so the wires will go back behind there. Then the head will mount there. And I made a modification to the top part of the housing, and I created this mount. I used the model of the Fleur de lis to inset into this little mount, so that will attach there. And then you've got feet here and holes, and that will mount like that. So all together, I'll leave the LEDs out, but that's going to be your light. And whenever I want to swap out this top part with something not as goofy as my head, I'll just create a different mount with whatever design I decide, and it'll just swap out, and you've got your magnetic connected LED that will, whoa, excuse me, that will provide easy connections on and off. So that will fit in there. And that's about it. So I'm going to go ahead and glue, well, I'm probably going to just use silicone so that I can swap it out if needed. But I need to replace this top with this new top with the mounts for the actual light fixture. Glue the head there. Got to drill a hole to mount the LEDs. And that will be it. So I will get going on that and we'll be done. So I have to say, overall, I'm pretty pleased with the way it turned out. It's a little larger than I wanted. Here, I'm going to go ahead and unplug it. So the power supply is a little larger than I wanted. The motion sensor is quite a bit larger than I was expecting. I wound up turning off the light sensor because it seemed, I just wanted it to come on when there's motion. And whether it's light or dark, doesn't really matter. But I, kind of wanted to see how all that works with the ESP32 board, etc. The idea of the swapping off the top part, I like that. And I don't know about the magnetic connectors. Again, it's hard to build it into the case. And wiring it, you've still got the exposed wires. I guess I could do like another heat shrink. But like I said, I don't know how they're supposed to be wired up and connected. It just seems there should be another piece that plugs into or something. And anyway, comment below if you've used these and you know that there's a part or something that I'm missing. I wanted to build the power supply mainly just to get some experience with the ESP32 and figuring out how a power supply is built. That being said, you can just buy your standard iPhone charger. So this is a 5-volt, 1-amp power supply that has a USB-A connection. This is a 5-volt, 1-amp power supply. Now granted, this has an ESP board, etc. But so this is the power supply that I used for this. Basically built it from scratch with an AC to DC converter, 5-volt, 1-amp. I wired all these things onto this board there's a 500 milliamp fuse, safety capacitor, some other things for magnetic interference, etc., to make it compliant. If I wanted to sell this, I would have to get this whole fixture certified. It would cost probably $6,000 to get certified. I would have to make these, soldering all these components by hand, or I just buy one of these little power supply, USB power supplies. So that's really the better option, I think. And although I enjoyed, learning how to do this and soldering, and it was learning more than anything else, I think if I wanted to be able to sell these, my idea is to just take this power supply that you buy that's already been safety rated, etc., and simply build an enclosure that this sits inside of with a window for all the jargon, the safety stuff, so that you can say, hey, this has been safety rated, etc. And then just build the enclosure around it that would have not a true printed circuit board, but one of these, I forget what they call them, breadboard type things, to wire the ESP32 and whatever sensors I'm going to have. But I could certainly make it a lot smaller than this piece. The top part, right now, this is interchangeable, like I said. I may look at, instead of these magnetic connections, which I really like, but they're just, again, I don't know how you're supposed to, I don't think I'm using them properly. So I may do like a USB connection where it's just a USB male on the back of here that plugs in a USB female for the lights. I'll have to think about that, because your LEDs are just power, ground, and a data line. So there may be a way to do that with USB. But that's the changes I would make. I would go with a pre-store-bought power supply, build an enclosure around this to where this slides in and maybe locks in somehow, and then have the board. So it would just plug into this with a Mayo USB. And again, the reason is, if I wanted to sell this, I would have to have this certified as safe and, interference, minimal interference, etc. And that costs a lot of money, and it would make it not worthwhile. That's the next project, is to basically use this as the power supply. And I got a different motion sensor that is not it's a microwave motion sensor that sits inside the device, does not need line of sight. So I don't have this big thing on the front. And I'll try that for the next one. So again, hope you found this entertaining and maybe learned something. I sure learned a lot. And yeah, it's kind of goofy seeing my head light up when I walk by. But if I can make myself laugh or my my family laugh, then mission accomplished. So, all right, I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you next time.